chances are good that you and your team spend roughly 80% of the average workday communicating with other people. How do you know if you work well together? Hi, this is Farhana and welcome to my channel. So think about the relationship you have with your team members. Some I hope are thriving, but others probably a little frustrating. Those frustrating relationships make it harder to get things done for both sides. Sometimes it can feel like they're sucking you dry a little bit as a manager. I mean, you probably experience relationships like this, both as the manager and the one being managed, and truthfully, you've also contributed to some of the dysfunction in these relationships. How you work with others is as important for short and long-term success as what you're working on. Your words and actions create working conditions that have significant impact on your team's ability to perform and to develop. To accelerate relationship building with your team, create and share your own personal operating manual. It allows you to communicate how you best work, who you are, and how that impacts your relationships. To make sure your team's operating manuals have maximum impact, follow 3 steps. First, reflecting record who you are. There's a reason why the ancient philosophers wrote, "Know thyself." It is a critical first step to building relationship. It also happens to be the very first step to creating an operating manual. There are some key questions that you and your team can use to build individual operating manuals. These go beyond the traditional hygiene questions, such as, are you a morning or night person? And do you prefer email or chat? The first handful of questions in the operating manual are focused on you as an individual. Take your time and provide at least 3 to 5 good responses to each question. The first answer is really your only answer and really your best answer. The more responses you give, the closer to the truth you'll get. The next set of questions is about how you work with others. First, think about one of the best working relationships you've had. Second, this might be a different relationship altogether. Think about one of the most frustrating or stressful relationships. Keep in mind you are a contributor to the way each of those relationships had been. To keep yourself honest, I've got 3 triangulation tests for you to apply to each of your respondents, and I'd encourage you to do this with your teammates as well. The first triangulation test is to ask yourself, what degree of confidence do you have in those answers? Is it low? Is it medium? Or is it high? The second test is to ask yourself what data or examples to support your responses. This isn't necessarily going to be hard data, but it should be concrete examples from the past. The third test, and this is the bravest one to do, is to share your responses with someone you trust. This can be a best friend, a colleague, a sibling, a spouse, whoever it is for you. Get their reaction to your responses and revise as needed. Operating manuals are very personal. There's no one-size-fits-all, so you may find that you want you and your teammates to express yourselves through a different set of questions. Take Jay Desai, former CEO at Patience Ping, for example. Desai's operating manual detailed when he worked at his best, at his worst, and how he might help others be successful. In another example, Abby Follick, who's the founder and CEO of Global Citizen Year, phrased her questions slightly differently than the ones I suggested earlier, but they're fantastic and the essence is the same. They force anyone to dig deep, be vulnerable, and actually open up to your team about who you really are. You're done with the me part of the process. That wasn't so bad, right? But don't stop there. You're almost to the good stuff. It's time to turn that me into we. The real value of an operating manual is when you put it in someone else's hands. So many times what ends up happening is you create an operating manual and it's a beautiful thing, but then, because you don't engage it with other people, your operating manual misses its potential to create trust and build resilient relationships. This brings us to step 2 of the process: sharing your operating manual in a conversation with your teammate. Having this conversation is a bravely, it's a boldly, and it's absolutely necessary. It's easy to write things down and send them out on a document, but that is not relationship building. In the conversation, both parties should be clear about the objectives. When you share your operating manual, keep 3 goals in mind. The first goal of the conversation is to create mutual understanding of who you are and who that other person is. Who are you? Who am I? What makes us tick? What would make us happy? What would make us unhappy? But it's not just understanding each other better that's key to this. It's also that you're giving each other permission to keep checking in and keep trying to understand each other. So how do we continue to optimize our relationship? Successfully holding this first conversation gives you both permission to ask that question. The overreaching goal of this conversation is to build the best possible working relationship. So you want to be asking questions about where do you anticipate friction between the two of you and how might you address that? This relationship may not be the best one of your life, probably won't be, but the goal is for it to be the very best it can be. There are a few things to keep in mind before, during, and after the conversation to make the meeting effective. Before you had the conversation and share operating manuals, get in your best place physically and mentally. If your team is in an office, you might meet in a different physical location to indicate that this is a different type of meeting. If your team works remotely, changing your mindset will also be important. You want to explain the purpose of the meeting in your first onboarding conversation to ensure that hierarchies aren't at play and both parties assume positive intent as you're having the conversation. Remember, you're both feeling the same awkwardness. This is an unusual but so powerful conversation, but think about how you want people to be in such a moment. You want them to be vulnerable and positive and generous. If you think about how you want them to be, project that energy. Be the strongest signal in the room. You need to make sure that you're both sharing openly, equally, and answering the same set of questions from your operating manual. Make sure you ask follow-up question. My favorite, and what else? First answer is never their only answer, and this is also a powerful way to make sure that you're sharing the airtime in this conversation. Now, once the conversation is over and you both accepted the other's response, openness and generosity and curiosity and positivity, well, now you're ready to wrap up the meeting. But before you go, I want to suggest two great finishing questions. First, asked, what was most helpful or most valuable for you in this conversation? Give the other person time to reflect and respond, and then you reflect and respond to the same question. And then here's the second question. What needs to be said that hasn't yet been said? This powerful question ensures that there's lingering things that haven't yet been put on the table, get shared both by them and by you. This brings us to step 3 of building and using operating manuals, ongoing maintenance of the operating manual and of the relationship. Think of step 3 as tending the garden you planted. Now that you've shared operating manuals, you need to commit to regularly checking in with the other person. This can be daily, weekly, monthly, whatever works best for that person and is appropriate for your team. You want to inquire on how things are going, and those 2 questions from the original sharing conversation are pretty great place to start, or you might choose to check in on a more generally at first, just asking, hey, how are things going with the way you and me are working right now? If you're a remote team, this ongoing maintenance will need a little more attention than if you're in a physical office, simply because conversations are a little less spontaneous when they're virtual, but either way, it doesn't have to be formal. In fact, it's often best if it's not. You can check in on your relationships by sending a quick email or chat or text, whatever. You can slide those 2-second questions into the last 5 minutes of a video call about something else altogether. In fact, I would recommend that. Abby Follick from Global Citizen Year nailed to this ongoing effort after creating her operating manual. She shared it with her leadership team and asked for their input. Follick says she refreshes her manual every year and repeats the process with the team to help them stay real with each other. As you implement operating manuals with your teammates, keep these key takeaways in mind. So you need to know all 3 steps of the operating manual are crucial. Don't step over those steps 2 and 3, as tempting as it might be. I want to emphasize that those 2 steps, these are so crucial to establishing a team environment that will empower each employee to perform at their highest. Second, meeting virtually or face-to-face to talk about your personal truths and historical relationships will definitely feel awkward at first, have always, but that's okay. Lean into that awkwardness, and if it helps, address the elephant in the room. Show through your tone that you're committed to making this a positive experience for all. Third, prioritize operating manuals with new teammates above all other work. When people start working together, a temptation so strong is just to dive it right into creating the deliverables, but don't give in to this temptation to skip this foundational work. Be intentional and take the time needed to build and use your operating manual before starting on any deliverables. Thank you for watching. Please leave a like if you have learned something new today, and I will see you in the next one.